Today, we're digging into one of the most haunting and honestly most controversial cases in American history, the Atlanta child murders. And right at the center of it all is one man, Wayne Williams, and a web of evidence that, even decades later, seems to raise way more questions than answers. Right now, as we speak, Wayne Williams is serving 2 consecutive life sentences. But here's the thing, and this is where it all gets so complicated. He was only ever convicted of murdering 2 adults. The deaths of nearly 24 children, well, those were officially pinned on him after his conviction. But his guilt for those crimes was never actually proven in a court of law. To really get what was going on here, we have to go back in time, back to the late 70s and early 80s. Atlanta was a city gripped by fear. A wave of killings was terrorizing the community, and the official investigation would eventually point its finger at just one man. So after a really intense period of surveillance, Wayne Williams was finally taken into custody. For a city that had been living on a knife's edge, this felt like maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. And the trial that followed, it grabbed the entire nation's attention. The verdict finally came in, guilty. But, and I gotta stress this again, it wasn't for any of the child murders. Nope. The conviction was for the deaths of 2 adult men, Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne. The prosecution's strategy here was pretty fascinating. They wanted to link Williams to these 2 men so convincingly that the jury would have no choice but to think, yeah, he must be responsible for all the others too. So how'd they do it? I mean, the prosecution didn't have a smoking gun. They didn't have an eyewitness. What they had was something you can barely even see. They built their entire case on microscopic fibers. They literally wove this incredible web of evidence. They presented 19 different sources of fibers and hairs that they claimed connected everything, Williams's home, his car, even his dog, directly to the victims. For the time, this was a really groundbreaking use of forensic science. But the absolute star of the show, the centerpiece of their whole argument, was this one single, really unusual type of carpet fiber. This wasn't just any fiber. It was a specific yellowish-green nylon fiber that prosecutors argued was so incredibly rare, it created a statistically powerful link between Williams and the victims. Now, Williams tried to explain this away. He claimed that the carpet had been in his house since 1968. But then the prosecution just delivered a devastating blow to his credibility. They proved the company that made that specific fiber wasn't even founded until 1971. It was a lie, and it really damaged his defense. And then there was this, the powerful circumstantial argument that might have sealed the deal for the jury. Once law enforcement started watching Williams, and especially after they arrested him, the string of murders that had plagued Atlanta just stopped. For the prosecution, that was no coincidence. But you know what? Even with a guilty verdict, even with this powerful story, the case was far from settled. Almost immediately, really serious questions started popping up, creating these deep cracks in the official story. So, was this really justice served? Or was it something else? For a lot of people, Williams's conviction felt less like an ending and more like the beginning of a whole new mystery. From day one, Wayne Williams has said he's innocent. His legal team has always argued that he was railroaded, calling his conviction a profound miscarriage of justice that let the real killer, or maybe killers, get away with it. All right, so if it wasn't Williams, then who was it? Over the years, a few different theories have really picked up steam. Was Williams just a convenient scapegoat, an easy answer to calm down a city that was desperate for resolution? Or was it something even more sinister? Some theories pointed straight at the Ku Klux Klan, a claim that got a boost from an informant who said a white supremacist's brothers had taken credit for the murders. And this quote from Sidney Dorsey, who was a high-ranking law enforcement official at the time, really gets to the heart of that theory. He believed that Williams, a black man, was blamed for the murders of black children specifically to avoid a race war. He argued that arresting a white person would have caused riots all over the country. But the story doesn't just stop in 1982. For the next 40 years, this case would be challenged and re-examined again and again, pushed forward by Williams' constant appeals and the promise of new scientific breakthroughs. This timeline really shows you just how long and drawn out this whole fight has been. You got failed retrial requests in the late 90s, then cases being reopened in 2005, multiple rounds of new testing, and the most recent push was in 2019. The search for a final, definitive answer has just never stopped. So, those 2007 DNA tests were a huge deal. But the results, as you can see here, well, they were complicated. On one hand, mitochondrial DNA from a human hair matched Williams's maternal line, and DNA from dog hairs matched his German Shepherd, a sequence that's only found in about 1 out of every 100 dogs. Pretty damning, right? But then, other scalp hair DNA tests were less clear, described only as fairly significant, but not a 100% definitive match. And this was the FBI's final word on it. It's such a carefully phrased, legally precise statement that is also deeply unsatisfying. It doesn't clear him, but it also doesn't slam the door shut and say he's guilty. It just leaves him exactly where he's been for decades, trapped in suspicion without definitive proof. So after all this time, the case is still just a fixture in the American consciousness. It's a story that absolutely refuses to be forgotten, and for the city of Atlanta, it's a wound that has never, ever fully healed. And you can see its lasting power in pop culture everywhere. From the amazing podcast Atlanta Monster to a major storyline in the Netflix series Mindhunter, this case keeps getting re-examined, debated, and retold for whole new generations. And what about Wayne Williams himself? Well, he's now in his 60s, and he is still in prison. His last shot at parole was denied in late 2019, which pretty much guaranteed he'd stay behind bars for a while. But his story still isn't over. He's going to be eligible for parole again in November of 2027. And you can bet that when that happens, this case and all of its lingering questions will come roaring right back into the national spotlight. Which brings us right back to the question that started this whole thing. Was Wayne Williams a brilliant serial killer caught by groundbreaking science? Or was he a convenient scapegoat, sacrificed to bring peace to a city that was absolutely terrified? More than 40 years later, the full truth is still just out of reach.